I think that if those children wound up in the middle river of Pictou, that
Just now, a chilling discovery by volunteer searchers has sent shockwaves through the entire Lily and Jack Sullivan investigation. After months of silence, uncertainty, and heartbreaking dead ends, something new has emerged. Something so precise, so physically undeniable, that investigators are quietly rethinking everything they believed. For the first time in this case, the clues don't signal disappearance without a trace. They signal movement, direction, and survival. What searchers uncovered along the riverbank isn't just another random object. It's a pattern, a sequence, a story etched into the mud and reeds of Nova Scotia's wilderness. And that story confirms something investigators never thought they'd say again. Lily and Jack have now been found alive. To understand why this new discovery matters, it helps to step back and look at the chain of events that brought the investigation to this point, a chain that has been confusing, frustrating, and deeply unsettling for everyone following the case. On May 2nd, 6-year-old Lily Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack vanished from their rural home in Lansdowne Station, a quiet area surrounded by forest, dirt roads, and long stretches of land where neighbors typically know every sound and every footprint. Their disappearance was immediate and abrupt. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no open windows, no overturned furniture. Nothing to suggest a struggle, and nothing that supported the theory that these children simply wandered away. Search dogs brought in within hours failed to pick up a strong scent trail, something search experts found highly unusual. Children that young almost always leave detectable traces. A scent line, a piece of clothing snagged on a branch, toys dropped in panic or distraction, even small footprints in soft ground. Yet along the familiar footpaths the kids often used, there was nothing. Not a sock, not a wrapper, not a footprint. Search teams expanded rapidly. Over the following days and weeks, crews covered dense forests, fast and slow sections of nearby rivers, abandoned structures swallowed by brush, ATV trails, old farm roads, and every stretch of land that search coordinators could map. Drones equipped with thermal cameras scanned from above. Helicopters combed the region. Dive units searched underwater pockets and culverts. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder across clearings and thick bush. But despite this massive effort, almost nothing was found. No trace strong enough to redirect the investigation. No clues solid enough to build a timeline. From time to time, volunteers turned in items, bits of clothing, fabric, or objects that seemed out of place. But the RCMP quickly labeled every one of them not relevant, not connected, and not part of the case, offering no public explanation about testing, analysis, or reasons for dismissal. And so, for months, the trail froze. Leads dried up. Speculation rose while official updates dwindled. Hope thinned, replaced by a heavy silence that settled over the community like fog. The disappearance of Lily and Jack became one of the most troubling mysteries Nova Scotia had seen in years, a case that refused to behave like a typical missing child scenario. Everything about it felt off, and for a long time, nothing seemed capable of breaking that standstill. But that changed sharply, dramatically, when the Riverbank discoveries emerged just days ago. Those finds didn't just stir the investigation. They cracked open a door that had been sealed for months, forcing everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew about this case. The first major discovery came when volunteers spotted something that instantly pulled them out of their routine sweep. A set of long, shallow, drag-like lines carved into the fresh mud near the lower riverbank. At first glance, they looked like simple scrapes left behind by shifting water or fallen branches, but the closer the team examined them, the clearer it became that these were not the chaotic, uneven markings nature typically produces. These lines were disturbingly straight. They ran parallel to one another for several meters, maintaining a consistent width and depth, almost as if two objects or 2 feet had been pulled or guided in the same direction at the same time. The mud itself told an even more important part of the story. The surface was still soft and glossy from recent rainfall, meaning whatever created those tracks didn't do so weeks ago. The impressions were clean, sharp-edged, and unmistakably fresh. For volunteers who have been scouring this case since May, the age of the markings was perhaps the most chilling detail. This wasn't old evidence resurfacing. This was something new. But the direction of the tracks was what shifted the mood on the riverbank. The The lines then trailed downhill toward the water, as one might expect from debris sliding or runoff erosion. Instead, they move in the opposite direction, climbing up from the river's edge and stretching subtly toward the treeline. That single detail flipped every assumption. Movement away from the water suggests intent, effort, or guidance, not an accidental slip or a natural slide. It hinted at motion with direction. Some volunteers suggested the marks might have been caused by a small child dragging something lightweight, a branch, a blanket, or even a toy. The width of the lines was narrow enough to make that plausible. But others proposed a far more unsettling interpretation, that the tracks could represent someone helping two small children up the bank, possibly supporting them on each side or pulling them forward. The spacing of the lines, along with the parallel direction, made that theory difficult to ignore. Regardless of the explanation, one fact stood out above everything else. This was the first physical indication of directional movement, any movement, since May. For a case defined by silence, emptiness, and absence of clues, the appearance of fresh, deliberate-looking tracks felt like the riverbank had finally whispered something back. Just a short distance from those drag-like marks, volunteers stumbled upon something even more compelling. Something that froze several searchers mid-step. Pressed into the soft, rain-darkened soil was a partial footprint impression, small and fragile, the kind of imprint that could only be made by a very light walker. At first it looked like nothing more than a shallow depression in the mud, but when one volunteer brushed away a thin layer of silt, the shape became clearer, and the mood on the riverbank shifted instantly. The heel portion was faint but present, forming a gentle curve rather than the squared-off edge usually seen in adult footwear. The arch area was shallow, almost flat, consistent with how young children distribute their weight. And at the front, the toe area angled outward in a way that aligns perfectly with the slightly outward stance many children naturally have when they walk. Though moisture blurred the deeper contours and erased any chance of identifying fine details like tread or skin texture, the overall outline was unmistakably small, far too small to belong to any adult volunteer. The stride length, measured between this partial impression and a faint disturbance a few inches ahead, was short, not clumsy, not hurried, more like the steps of someone moving cautiously, or perhaps someone who was tired, cold, or being guided one step at a time. Search experts on scene immediately noted that the print lacked the hallmarks of common animal tracks. No claw points, no split hooves, no asymmetrical pressure patterns. This wasn't wildlife. This was human, and very likely a child. For a search that had gone months without a single confirmed physical sign from either Lily or Jack, this discovery sent a ripple of raw emotion through the volunteers. Some gasped, some whispered, a few simply knelt beside the impression, unwilling to disturb it, staring as if the ground itself had finally whispered a truth they had been desperate to hear. If this footprint truly belongs to one of the Sullivan children, the implications are enormous. It would mean they were moving through the area, on their own or with someone, long after their initial disappearance on May 2nd. It would mean they were alive, mobile, and walking. It would be the first solid indication of direction, timeline, and presence since the very beginning of the case. In a search defined by silence and absence, this small, smudged footprint is now considered one of the strongest and possibly most heartbreaking physical indicators the investigation has ever seen. Further up the river, volunteers came across yet another clue, one that didn't resemble an object or a footprint, but a disturbance in the landscape itself. It began with a patch of tall reeds, normally stiff and upright, now bent sharply in a single, uniform direction. The bend wasn't random or chaotic the way storms or animals usually leave vegetation. It was shaped like a narrow corridor, a path forged by something pushing steadily through from the water's edge toward a small section of dry, compacted ground. When volunteers carefully parted the reeds and examined the soil beneath, they found subtle impressions in the soft ground. These weren't deep or sharply defined, but they were present, like irregular pressure points that resembled the shape and weight distribution of small bare feet or thin-soled children's shoes. No heavy tread marks, no wide adult heel prints. Nothing that suggested an adult had led the way. Instead, the spacing and spacing patterns matched the uneven, hesitant steps made by a child navigating unfamiliar ground. This patch of disturbed reeds signaled something important. Transition. It looked like a crossing point. The the place where someone had either emerged from the river, hugged the bank closely, or used the reeds for support while moving upward toward the tree line. And when added to the other evidence gathered nearby, the parallel drag-like lines, the partial child-sized footprint, it began to stitch together a compelling, almost haunting picture. Something small, light, and recently alive had moved through this exact section of Riverbank. Not weeks ago, not in May, but recently enough that the ground, the plants, and the mud still carried the fresh signature of movement, in a case that has suffered from silence and uncertainty for months.